Hello. On this segment about ethics, we at least need to discuss some of the regulations. Actually, the FAA does not regulate um, ethics, obviously, or does it regulate privacy rules? That's either a local matter, um, a civil matter, but the FAA is not concerned with that. But it is concerned about, and we've talked about this before, it's concerned about possible damage to property or injury to human beings. So, Part 107, remember 14 CFR 107, paragraph 23 talks about hazardous operation, and it's in really clear language as we've come to expect from the regulations pertaining to pilots. It's going to be clear. And it says here, no person may operate a small unmanned aircraft system in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. Right? Simple. Or allow an object to be dropped from a small UAV in a manner that creates an undue hazard to persons or property, which is just maybe just elaborating on A, saying the same thing, except I guess they think that's a major issue. So anytime we get uh, in any kind of a dispute, they're going to go back to this regulation. If it becomes a civil matter or a local matter, well, you're acting careless or reckless. So you just need to be aware of that. But that is a regulation. Okay. Also, 14 CFR 107, paragraph 15, condition for safe operation. No person may operate a civil UAV unless it is in a condition for safe operation. Prior to flight, remote pilot and command must check the small unmanned aircraft system to determine whether it's in a condition for safe operation. Okay, it says specifically remote pilot and command. Okay, it's not the guy that owns the drone. It's not if you get a job with a company to fly a drone. It's not their responsibility. It's your responsibility to make the decision whether it's in safe operation or not. And then B, no person may continue flight of the small UAV when it becomes known whether it was no longer in a condition for safe flight. Just saying that once it gets in the air doesn't mean you're relieved of all responsibility. If for some reason you notice that things aren't safe, then you need to terminate the flight. Okay. Carriage of hazardous materials, another reference here. 14 CFR 107, paragraph 36, carriage of hazardous material. No, a small unmanned aircraft may not carry hazardous materials. The term hazardous material is defined in 14 CFR. There's a whole other regulation, 171.8. Okay, you've driven on the highway and you've seen these tanker trucks driving down the highway and they have this big label on the side of it, poison or flammable or whatever. It's got to have these hazardous um, material warning tags on it. So without a waiver, we're not allowed to carry hazardous material. But wait, you say, I thought those LiPo batteries are pretty hazardous. They could burst into flames and burn somebody or start a forest fire. Well, the exception is if it's a power source, which makes sense, right? The LiPo battery that's producing the power for that drone to fly it's okay for that. That's a kind of hazardous material that's allowed. You can't strap a spare battery on the side of your drone though, because that's hazardous material. This would also explain why we have gasoline powered or kerosene powered or hey, nuclear powered drones, right? You could have a nuclear powered drone. Obviously, it's going to have some fuel, and the fuel is hazardous material, generally speaking, but it's allowed because that's what drives the drone. Okay. Uh, Another regulation to help us in these kind of situations, Part 107, 14 CFR 107, paragraph 21, in-flight emergency. An in-flight emergency requires an immediate action. The remote PIC can deviate from any rule of this part to the extent necessary to meet that emergency. This is an important regulation. It's also in manned aircraft have this same exception, except it's not 107, but just to say that I can't think of a scenario that we'd have to violate a regulation, but I suppose if we were at 400 feet and a manned aircraft was at 100 feet, and in order to avoid crashing, you had to climb above 400 feet, that might be That would obviously be a violation of the regulations, but you would be allowed to do that only to the extent necessary to meet that emergency. Big statement there. To the extent necessary. So if they are indeed at 100 feet and you're at 400 feet, that's 300 feet between you. You probably don't need to climb any higher. But that was my only example. B, this is important too. B tells you what to do if that happens. You violate a rule, now you feel guilty, you want to confess to somebody. They don't want to hear about it. You don't need to be calling the FAA and telling them, oh man, I made him. No. But if they ask you for a report, you need to send a report. So they have to ask you. The administrator would be the FAA. So the administrator of the FAA would notify you and say, I need a report of that deviation. Okay? So only upon request when they ask you. And it's the FAA administrator. It's not the police. It's not your neighbor. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Safety event reporting. Right. No later than, let me just read it to you. And you can read, I know, but I'm going to read it anyway. No later than 10 calendar days after an operation that meets the criteria of either paragraph A or B, that's the ones below, of this section, Remote Piloting Command must report to the FAA in a manner acceptable to the administrator any operation of the small unmanned aircraft involving at least, okay, A, serious injury to person or loss of consciousness of a human being. So your drone goes out of control and slices somebody's cheek, and all depends. If it's just a little bruise, I don't think that's what they intend. But if it requires stitches or requires a hospital visit, they're leaving it a little bit vague there. Yes, but serious injury means like actually needing, actually maybe needing bleeding, maybe, or obviously loss of consciousness, a broken bone, that kind of thing. So we're talking about something more serious than just the bruise, okay? Lacerations, that kind of thing. And it has been suggested that you can go to to some medical websites where they classify injuries according to the severity of it, and class 1, 2, 3, and there's classes for serious injuries. So we could be a lot more specific if we wanted to. And I would expect if, the FAA probably not going to get involved in that, but if you have a civil suit and you don't have insurance, liability insurance, the lawyers are going to probably go to that and say, well, this was serious. But maybe you can get your lawyer to say, no, it wasn't serious. That's A. Okay. Or the more complicated one is B. Okay, so if we have serious injury, loss of consciousness, within 10 days, we got to tell the FAA. That's up to you. You don't have to wait for them to ask you. You have to redo it. B, if there is any damage to property other than your aircraft, all right, you got a $10,000 drone and you crash that baby, you don't need to report that because that's your loss. But if you damage somebody else's property, you may have to report it. You have to go to either 1 or 2. 1 is if the cost for repair, materials and labor, does not exceed $500, you don't have to report it. So, not including your drone, but whatever you hit and damaged. So, I can, think about that. Or 2, the fair market value of the property does not exceed $500 in the event of total loss. So if you totally destroy it. So $500, that's the number you sort of need to remember. If it costs more than $500 to repair it or replace it, you need to put a report in. So they eliminated all the little nicks and bumps and stuff like that. They don't want to hear about that. But other than that, this is your responsibility to do this, right? So I hope that makes sense as far as safety event reporting. 14 CFR 107, paragraph number 9.